This is What Would the Smart Party Do production. If you catch all the YouTube videos, we've played through with GM Matt, we're going to call him because we've got two Matts on the call tonight, running us through an initial adventure from the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. So this is like a part two, effectively part three, where we're going to talk about how we can make that scenario more awesome, potentially, if someone else wants to run it. So I'm Gaz, one half of the What Would the Smart Party Do podcast, and I'll hand you over to Baz to explain who he is.
Well, hello. I'm Baz. I'm the other quarter tonight of the Smart Party podcast, coming to you audio and visual. And tonight we're going to look at what the Smart Party actually did. And we're going to find out if you are thrilled about Wildemount. Or maybe you're not. Maybe we're not. Maybe we are. Let's find out. So what we're going to do is I'm going to share some discussion. We've got our Dungeon Master with us, which is DM Matt. We've got two players, Matt and Gaz, and I played myself. And what I'm going to do is just take the crowd through some of the highlights of the module that we played, some stuff that we really enjoyed. We're going to take a little look at as well at maybe some of the things where, from the DM's perspective, maybe things that didn't work as well as maybe or as slickly as he was hoping, and from the player's perspective, what it felt like on our side of the screen as well, and what we would do if we were going to do it again. So joining us, I've already mentioned the names. We've got Matt as well, our other player. Hello, Matt.
Hello, hi.
And we've got our DM who's been bumped down the rating slightly. He's not top of the list anymore. So he's just down there. So, hiya, Matt.
Hello. That's Zoom randomly determines the party order.
I'm getting a nosebleed up here. This is ridiculous. We look like the anthill mob. We just need a trench coat around us.
Oh, weird. That's bizarre because on my screen you're at the bottom of the stack looking up.
Oh, is that right? Oh, yeah. Funny how that's worked. Okay.
Yeah, I'm more diplomatic. I've got a cross, so.
Let's get stuck into this scenario, this adventure, which I believe is available for free. Matt, maybe you can tell us a bit about how you came across Explorer's Guide to Wildemount and the adventure which you called Frozen Sick?
Frozen Sick, yeah. What's the word where something doesn't roll off the tongue particularly nicely?
Frozen sick.
And it's frozen. No, so unless you're hiding under a stone, it's almost impossible to avoid hearing reference to a little game called Dungeons and Dragons and a mildly popular podcast called Critical Role, and a young man by the name of Mr. Mercer, who runs that particular show. He's been working with Wizards of the Coast on a brand new campaign setting book for the Wildemount continent, which is from his setting that he and the rest of the Critical Role gang have adventured through over the last few years. And the current Critical Role campaign is on this continent. The adventure was released for free as a bit of a gazetteer kind of introduction to the setting, and obviously as part of the marketing materials prepared to support the launch of the book. It is included in the book itself, is available as a PDF download from Wizards. I think it's also available on D&D Beyond. It's actually quite unique insofar as it is a free asset on Roll20. So that comes with all the maps, all the dynamic lighting all set up for you, all of the notes, everything. And in actual fact, when we ran, I ran almost exclusively from the Roll20 notes, with some of my handwritten kind of pre-session note-taking that we all do in our own special ways. But pretty much everything I ran from Roll20 because it had the hot links to the various character sheets and monster sheets and all that kind of stuff. So it's actually a brilliant value proposition. It just goes to show the power of D&D and Wizards, because it's incredibly difficult to get free samples on Roll20. They have a fairly hard rule about these kinds of things, but hard rules are there to be flexed, right? And if you've got long, wonderful brown hair and dreamy brown eyes, then why wouldn't they just, oh God, we're doomed.
Ain't gonna happen for me, mate.
No, bless me. I think it's brilliant because it's a fully featured way of introducing game, especially in the current climate, getting gamers into playing D&D and using a virtual tabletop. So yeah, it's great.
So the pitch for the adventure itself, taken directly from the text, is that something is killing people in Palebank Village, and if the characters don't stop it, they might be next. Frozen Sick is an adventure that takes characters from 1st to 3rd level, introduces them to the continent's biting north region, the bleak Arctic realms of the greying wildlands and Islecross. So throwing it open to Matt and to Gaz and to whoever really, what about those first scenes then, those hooks to get our characters into the adventure? We'd already generated characters. We'd done that, and we'd had a tiny little session 0 about how we might know each other or what have you. But what about getting involved in the adventure? Gaz, Matt?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to do. I think that the setup, as I recall it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is someone approaches you with his job, basically, at a graveside. And it's kind of offered up as something that he's doing discreetly. And I know a lot of adventuring parties suffer with this, that anytime someone says you need to be discreet, the chances are that the players are going to run into it and do things that will make it less than discreet, to be honest. So while strong in terms of like lives are on the line and that kind of thing, so that definitely gives you a good impetus to go and try and sort this out, let alone your own safety. I think probably something that could improve that push maybe is not worrying so much about whether it's discreet or not, whether it's being quiet or all the rest of it. Like I think if you can accelerate the adventure more into more of the villagers understand it's happening, and there's rumours around town about it. Perhaps people have different ideas about what might be causing it, that kind of thing. And I think more of a push could get you set off even faster onto the adventure. For me personally.
Yeah, I echo your thoughts there. I think I like the hook with by the graveside because it's immediately a people problem, right? It's totally connected with the people here. We get the name of the dwarf that's died, and suddenly it becomes very real. I think the point about making it clear that people know this is going on, and it's not so much about being discreet; it's about being respectful, perhaps, and recognise this is a small community. Everybody's going to be relying on everybody else. Any casualty to this disease is going to impact on the community, economically, socially, people's loved ones. And bringing out that human story right from the impact will pull on those heartstrings, and I think that's really important for the engagement at the beginning of this.
Okay. Matt, from your side of the screen, what were you given, if anything at all, to help get the PCs engaged with playing D&D tonight?
Yeah, I was given a number. There's a couple of call outs in Roll20. It gives you a brief overview as to what's going to happen with the headline items. Mentioning the poor dwarf that's going into the ground. But the kicker for the session really was a bit of read aloud text to kind of read or paraphrase that sort of set the scene with the sun going down behind the mountains and the snow falling from the sky, and then it was a little bit weird that the players can decide if any of them knew Ergon or not at that point in time. So I think they were trying to roll a little bit of session 0 up, and we had already done that beforehand. But for me, the kicker of Elro turning up, having a quiet word, sharing his concerns, and I think for me, I would have liked to have signposted a little bit more strongly that the players being in the village are also potentially in danger from this disease, and that would have created a bit more of a selfish interest, which I don't think would hurt as an early hook. The altruistic stuff can come out, but I rather quite like the idea of players first and foremost going, oh, we probably ought to definitely get involved in this.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, on a basic level, the idea of a magical plague that needs to be stopped there's nothing wrong with that. It's better than rescue the princess from the tower, I guess, or clear out the goblins in the sewers. It feels like something immediate. Maybe that's just the world we live in today. Maybe it's a little bit on the nose, in fact, but that's just bad timing on everyone's part, I think.
A game of life, yeah.
I think there's quite a bit in that first scene. I don't know if you guys remember it clearly. There felt like there was an awful lot of information dump, and the reason I remember it is because I think I got my numbers mixed up as I was trying to sort of exposit a timeline to you guys, because the timing is actually an important factor that replicates throughout the adventure. So it was important that I got it right up front, and I didn't, because it's actually quite a complicated timeline. So I think if you're going to prep this, have a really clear picture of the timeline, And as we talk about the adventure later on, I think we'll come back to the timeline, because that feels like a theme amongst the feedback that we felt after playing the game. So have a clear idea of the timeline is definitely a thing that the module didn't communicate really clearly to me.
All right. So without too much ado, I think we were quite quick, because I think the thing with hooks is that you've got fish who want to jump on them in this particular game. So, you know, we're here to play D&D, let's get going. And we did get going. And soon enough, we found ourselves in the settlement of Pale Bank and started introducing ourselves and mixing it up with some of the NPCs. So a little bit of a classic situation, although a snowy one. You've got a fairly small village with a few interesting locations to go and visit and some people to engage with. So NPCs and that starting location, how did that land with you guys?
I think it was fine. I think we had a couple of questions, didn't we, about there's quite a lot of glass blades in the village, which are like rangers and the protectors, and that seemed to be like you know, a big number of them. So again, I'm always thinking of like, what can we do to improve and that kind of thing, and perhaps some factionalism or something within that organisation, or what they're going to do about the situation that we're in, was perhaps something I expected to see, or we could have driven out a bit maybe. But certainly the other characters around, you had like 3 or 4 immediate points to go and investigate, and I think that's, you know, that's kind of key. Certainly a lot of people complain about feeling railroaded in adventures sometimes, certainly published ones. So if you have more than one button to press for how you're going to progress, I think that's fine. And it seemed, as Matt can tell us if this is true, but as it progressed, we could have missed 1 or 2 out. We didn't have to go and push every button for the adventures to continue. So I think that was a good setup.
No, definitely. It was, if you remember rightly, you were given 2 clear leads, which was go and have a look at Ergon's cabin, who was the dwarf that brought the disease back with him, and Tolgi, who was a trapper who lived just outside of the village, who didn't want to talk to anyone. So for players, you've immediately got 2 clear choices, 2 clear buttons to go and press, and then it then turns out that there's an optional place that you can go to follow up on, and then ultimately you go to the little mini dungeon, which is the climax for that first section of the adventure. So I quite liked it. I felt quite comfortable that you could go in any of those directions. They were all fairly simple setups, and I felt quite relaxed that you could go in whatever order you wanted to go in.
Yeah, it was a kind of a whodunit for beginners, but it just had just enough NPCs so that you didn't feel flummoxed, right? It was very easy to move the game quite quickly forward, which I felt was really good, because not everybody's here to play Sherlock Holmes, the role-playing game, right? So, you know, you want to D&D, you want to roll some dice, you want a good story to help you feel that the dice you roll are relevant. And I think we had a good setup there. I think Gazzy's point about there being some kind of faction, or factionism, we can come back to that later, because I'm always very mindful when there's the first level adventure that says we need your help and you're the only ones that can do this. You know, it's like, well, why are we the only ones that can do this? You know, help me understand my role in the world here and why I'm not a superhero, why I'm someone coming into a situation.
Yeah, I've run this again a couple of times since we played it, and in those instances, I kind of went much more down the route of emphasising Tolgi, who is the sister of someone who's up to something a bit nefarious, and she's not particularly a clean-cut character either. And so I really laid into the fact that she didn't want to talk to the glass blades because they were ostensibly the authority in the area, and that's why Elro was talking to you. As you were outsiders, you might stand a chance of talking to her. She might listen to you, but she's definitely not going to listen to him because he's the busies turning up.
Authorita, yeah.
Authorita.
Yeah, dealing with those NPCs. I remember that part of the session was a real highlight for me. I really enjoyed wandering around and getting to know the other players, the other player characters as well. I think we had some good times with that. Built some nice little pieces of dialogue and some nice little scenes, and it was one of those ones where I can remember those elements quite well. I quite like the visualization of the very snowy village. No map. Matt, did you not have a map? Did they not provide you one? I was
no.
The settlement.
They didn't provide me with a map, and so for the next 2 times I did run it, I managed to find a brilliant map off of I think it was the Cartographers Guild, and use that, and it made such a difference. Being able to just say, this is where Tolgi's cabin is, this is where Ergon's cabin is, this is where the Happy Dwarf, the inn is. And then I was also able to, by clicking around the map, scatter in a few other random locations, but seed in Pelk's Curios, which, as you guys know, is one of the areas that you end up potentially going to. So I could say, oh look, here's the smithy, here's the general store, here's like a little curio store, and here's this. And I'm kind of putting Chekhov's gun onto the table at that point in time, which felt quite good. But without a map, I think it was harder. It was definitely harder.
Okay, so despite my love of maps, it was time to move on the map and time to leave Palebank. And can I just put this straight out there? 200 miles to get to the next location, or wherever it was. The next location wasn't so bad, was it? It was Croker Cave, but it was still like, it felt like a very long way away from the village. So these bandits have got some commute to get in and out of the place. So I think Croker Cave was next, wasn't it? And it was is it some trek, or it's not mentioned at all? I think Matt, you shared with us after.
It's not mentioned at all.
Where it is.
I kind of was caught on the hop because we didn't have a detailed location map. I kind of went, it's about 8 miles away, because I didn't want it to be so. Yeah, I didn't want it to be so close that you kind of went, well, how do the glass blades not know about this?
It's over there.
Yeah, exactly. It's right there.
That big cave mouth at the end of the village. Yeah.
All the antis outside and stuff. And bad
guys this way. There's the sound of a frog going,
Ribbit.
The town sign says home to Croker Cave on it.
Yeah, exactly. So that was just a random number I made up. Again, like having learned from that, the next couple of times I ran it, I had it up in the cliffs overlooking the docks. Again, I could then foreshadow the fact that there are docks, and I know that players are going to end up on them at some point in time. So I could actually put them into the scene as well. And then I kind of really played into the fact that the bandits used this because it was a great vantage point to see who was coming and going and who they could rob and all that kind of stuff. So it felt a lot more coherent. But those cliffs kind of shifted about 6 miles closer to the village. So they were only about 20 minutes walk away.
Okay, so Matt and Gaz, we had our first chance to really get that classic D&D experience. We ended up in some caves, we got into initiative, had some battles, did a bit of exploring, poking about, talked about lighting and what have you. How was the it's not really a dungeon, is it? But how was that cave exploration for you guys?
I think there's areas of it which I thought had potential to be, quite fulfilling encounters. The cave is not particularly big. I think, as I recall, you've got 2, 3, maybe 6 or 7 locations in it, something like that. You've got the initial pond,
6,
which I kind of like the idea of, and I think, Matt, you handled it very, very well in terms of how we managed to get past it without having to have an encounter there. Well, the encounter didn't require us beating up frogs. I think that worked really well. I think a DM coming into that needs to really consider what they want to do with that particular room. And I also like to think these kind of living in environments, if there are bandits in there, how do they navigate this place on a regular basis? Because it's got to be convenient to them. So that's where the cave needs to feel real in that.
I don't think, maybe I didn't really emphasize that enough, but the adventure does say that there's like a 25-foot plank of wood that they use to stretch across this pool. Ignoring the physics of actually trying to lever a 25-foot plank of wood across a 30-foot pool, like your mileage may vary, but yeah, I don't think I kind of telegraphed that well. But I have thought about it, that was actually a classic 5-room dungeon. And if you're not aware of a 5-room dungeon, it's definitely like a little pattern to go and look at. But that was the puzzle guardian for that particular complex, and it was quite nice. The only thing that I would urge, and it didn't happen to you guys, I don't believe, because the Goliath went into the water and passed his con saves, but putting exhaustion onto players at the beginning of a dungeon, I'm not so sure about the wisdom of that, because that
exhaustion's nasty. Yeah.
Hugely penalising.
And first level characters, they're so squishy, and if you've got one in there with exhaustion, like 9 times out of 10 they're going to retreat and have a long rest and lost all pace, right? And the 1 time out of 10 where they're going to just press on, I think someone's going to end up getting killed because they're suffering from exhaustion. So I would be really wary of that. I would just make it do a bit of cold damage or something that disadvantage on the next skill check until you've warmed up. Something like that, a bit softer. Exhaustion's brutal.
Yeah, I agree. Can we also talk about the "don't get in my bedroll" trap, which I think that's something that just, for me, I had real trouble with understanding why a group of bandits, of which there might be, I don't know, 8 or 10, would have the fake bedroll that would drop you into a pit. I mean, that to me felt, it just felt like a bit of a cheap shot, I guess. I think I would look to have pits, because as you say, it's a classic dungeon environment. You need a pit trap, right? You need a tripwire. You need something to give the rogue a way to feel cool, and for other people to go, damn, why weren't we paying more attention? But there are other places to put it, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's definitely elements of the caves that felt like classic dungeon, and certain elements felt like a place where bandits live. So yeah, I think you're right, Mike. That although it seems quite simple because only a small number of rooms and not many moving parts, it sort of behooves the DM up front to look at it and think, how do I want to present this to my players? And do you want to run it more like a classic D&D adventure, or dungeon bashing kind of thing, or are you more interested in making it a living, breathing place and what the bandits up to, and are they coming in and out, and is somebody on watch, and do you watch to see what they do? Or so you could play it a number of different ways, but it does require a little bit of thought up front, I think, to make it really sing. And
I think there was a couple of missed opportunities. You guys didn't actually go down that route. You kind of tried to sneak through the bat cave and ended up creating a swarm of bats. But in the other direction, the elves and the dwarf bandits were there feeding dead bats to some frogs, training them to do tricks and stuff. And I'm glad you didn't go that way, because to my head, that just didn't match up with the fact that their leader is literally dying and wants to get out and get down to like civilization to find a cure as quickly as possible. And they're in there throwing dead bats for frogs to leap out of the water and do somersaults with. And it's like, shouldn't they be packing up and be ready to go when their boss tells them to?
Yeah, it's a bit cute, isn't it? I suppose.
A little bit.
What about those? So we meet some big bads, I suppose, and a bad lieutenant at the back of the cave, as far away from the entrance as you can get, as is their traditional home. and they get to live for about 4 rounds. So there's only so much you can do. Poor old Matt's got to inject some personality into these 2 geezers, and got to get some dialogue out. And we're going to be trying to impose the dead condition upon them as quickly as possible. So if you remember that little boss encounter, how was that for everyone?
I think what you could possibly do with it, because you can't, like you say, you're right. By the time you've got over this other bit of lake, you're kind of right there in a room in front of you, and they've got like the NPC's got 1 chance to try and talk the player characters into not beating them up before someone's rolling initiative, and you're trying to stab them because they're evil. There's ways you could set that encounter up a little bit differently, maybe, because there's like a priest and then like their bodyguard, perhaps. I think it is. As the party progressing, you could get the bodyguard kind of at the entrance to the cave going, look, my boss wants to talk to you or something. It's I think, again, thinking about the scenario in advance and then working out, do you want it to be a little bit more real worldy? You could present the players with a choice before they even get to meeting the big bad. Or is the big bad's lieutenant going to be a bit sneaky? Is he going to bargain for his own life and try and sell his boss out? There's all kinds of things you could play with it. Or you can go the more traditional route, which is you get to the room where there's 2 people there, and ultimately you're going to have to sort them out because they're the baddies and you're the goodies, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that there's actually a strength of Croker Cave was that you could play it as the monsters, we'll call it the frogs and the bats and so forth, are the things that you want to, as you say, give them the dead condition. But with the bandits and the boss, you could make that those role-playing encounters. That wouldn't be difficult to do, especially if they play we're here to find out what's going on about this sickness, and the fun-loving bandits say, well, actually our master's suffering from that. Maybe you need to speak to him or her, and you could have them guide you through the caves. And, we kind of got that anyway with getting across the Goliath one, but taking it all the way to the bad guy, who you then find out was it a priestess or priest of Tiamat? And suddenly, it's draw swords and attack, or it's find out what they want and find out how we can help them. So I think there are opportunities there in the cave.
Interestingly, the adventure is written, and it's probably worth kind of going back and just having a look at that scene on the video, because she doesn't move to attack. She asks you why you're here and what you're after. And I think you guys went to go time. She didn't instigate, it was a fight. And there is absolutely written in the adventure an outcome where she just doesn't want to fight you. She just wants to get out of there. She gives you a little bit of exposition and seeds a few kind of rumors, that may or may not have been useful. And that's fine. Like, I think some parties will do that, and some parties will just go straight to, well, she's a priest of Tiamat, I'm going to absolutely slaughter her, and before she does anything grievous. I think the polish I would do to this is almost certainly most party will use old Croaker, the big giant frog, to go across the big icy pool.
Yeah.
And I quite like the idea of, you've already seen old Croaker, now suddenly you're having a bit of a rumble with his mistress. I like the idea of the frog levering himself out and involving himself in the fight on turn 2 or turn 3. Wow. And now suddenly the players are stuck between two fairly hard places. And then the tables immediately turn at that point. Instead of it being a 3-man stomp on one priestess or one cleric, now it's like, oh God, we're on a divided front between two fairly scary things. I think that would be quite cool. But again, urge caution if you're doing that to first level characters.
Yeah, I think we were quite lucky there, weren't we? Because I think she's 3rd or 4th level and we were 1st level, and I think we had a couple of lucky saves, and that encounter could have easily gone another way, I think.
Yeah,
definitely easily gone another way.
It went the way it went, and then and I think it was shortly after that we realised that actually we're on the wrong continent, which happens all the time when you're on a quest, and we needed to take a very long, very, very, very long Arctic cruise to go to a different continent where the solution to our problems may be found if we were prepared to essentially mount an expedition across many, many weeks of frozen tundra. I may be getting some of those details wrong, but that's my overriding memory of this, is the princess is not in this castle. She is in fact 300 miles away for tickets to this solve the plague.
Let me remind you just of like the crunch of the detail then. So you went from Palebank, sailed a couple of days round to Islecross, the mountain, the volcanic islands. There you met 2 or 3 NPCs, including the buyer, who was your kind of teleport home route, and someone who randomly met you, and then Ergon's kind of traveling buddy, who you kind of went and had a quick chat with as well. And then you're right, it was, and this may be me, but it didn't tell me where on the Islecross map the actual ruins were that you were going to. So I picked a point on the map that said Aeorian Ruins. It must be that, right? And then when I looked at it, it's like, it's nearly 400 miles or 300 miles. It's like, oh. And
you just insisted making us walk everywhere. That's what
we walked it.
Yeah.
But this, it didn't. Where's the Into the Wilds? So the adventure does give you like the Overland Travel section, and it basically says that it gives you all your pace and whether you're going at slow, medium, or fast. And I mean, if you can be bothered to calculate that, feel free with it. But
well, how was it for Matt and Gaz when we think the decision was made probably as a table? I don't think anyone said it out loud, but we kind of teleported there, really, didn't we? As in, we went at the speed of plot. There weren't any encounters on the way or anything else like that. We had that shot at joining another expedition. Personally, I felt that they were doing something that was so far removed from what we were doing that we couldn't join it. But how did you feel about the overland travel aspect?
For me, it was fine. I think this comes back to the timing issue that Matt mentioned earlier, that I think we're on a 2-week clock. We're supposed to get this cure for a pair of tiefling children back at the village and that sort of thing. And it was going to take us more than 2 weeks to walk there and back. And it's kind of, anytime you put timing in an adventure, you're sort of setting yourself up for a little bit of a fall. So like maybe not putting hard limits on things is one way around it. But yeah, I think by that point, even as players, we felt we wanted to get on with it and get the cure. So it comes to a natural point, and you could do the, how many miles a day do you do, and do you push yourselves, and are there any random encounters and that kind of thing. If you feel you want to add more meat on the bones, I think from how the scenario runs by that point, because you've done quite a bit of investigation and travel, it feels like you're ready to get into the meat of the scenario by then, and start achieving your goals.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because I was just reflecting on the Croker Cave, just going back to that. You could make that a one-shot adventure just with the bad guy having the cure and wanting to kill everybody there because, I don't know, someone annoyed them, right? You could make that a one-shot adventure. This actually felt like it could have turned it into a mini campaign. You could trundle across the tundra, you could have encounters there, you could find other things. You might need longer to solve the problem with the plague, to make sure that felt real. So this was an interesting one for me. You could have gone for the, as you say, speed of plot, boom, make it location based, or you could have easily gone for, you're 3 weeks in, you've run out of food, who's going to hunt for rabbits or whatever, how are you going to get there, how are you going to keep yourselves alive. Very different styles of game that I think this actually accommodated. What wasn't clear on is what's best for the table, and maybe it shouldn't answer that question. Don't know.
Matt, what was it like for you playing those NPCs in that settlement? I don't know if it had a name, but the place we landed at, I got the feeling it was tense in blizzards and a bit like the kind of Arctic expedition kind of base camp. But what was that like for you?
There's one bit that was awkward for me, but then that's just me trying to, adapt and to the real world, and the gender fluid character. I felt awkward because I kept slip of the tongue, not using the right pronouns, and that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But that's more of a personal thing, that I'm just not that well practiced at being able to do that. I didn't mind that they were gender fluid. I thought that was actually quite cool. Made them, it made the world feel a little bit, sort of richer and more interesting as a result of that. I think the fact that had the dragon, had this mysterious relationship with Elro, and I quite like the mystery that built in, and I felt like that character could really easily become quite a decent little adventure dispenser for people who are going to go on to do a campaign. So I quite enjoyed playing that character, with their luxurious tent in the middle of this weird kind of Wild West Arctic camp kind of thing. But yeah, the weird one was the dwarf that greeted you at the docks. Just was a random dwarf who seemed to have an awful lot of stuff to say, but ultimately played no real part other than being a guide around camp, which, I think you could have cut that out completely and just fast-tracked you straight into the buyer and talking with them. Would have been better. Because we actually spent quite a bit of time, if I remember rightly. And I don't know Gaz, how logical did you feel it just flowing around that particular camp, meeting those people?
It was a little bit odd because that dwarf character mentioned, I was expecting something to come of that, and if there's no end goal to it, and it's a scenario where you're under time pressure, that feels a little bit like, it feels like a character you can have on the way back, if you know what I mean. Once you've got the cure, then you bump into that sort of character. And similarly with the expedition that was going to be going, it's like the character says, oh, we're going on an expedition that sort of way, but we're not going for a few days. And it's like, well, with a time pressure mission, we can't hang around a few days to go with the expedition. We kind of need to go now and that kind of thing. So, while I liked some of the colour in the tents, I don't know if perhaps as a player I was thinking a little bit about, I've got my sands of time are running out in my little hourglass to get this cure for all these people. So we did spend a reasonable amount of time talking to the colour in the camp, which is fine. But part of me was also thinking from a scenario point of view, like, we need to get on and find a cure as well. So the kind of talky bits I would have expected to do maybe on the way back after you've delivered the cure, perhaps.
Yeah, it felt like a good base camp for further adventures. I think is how I will describe it. If you really wanted to do proper Arctic North stuff, there were a couple of interesting NPCs, the random teleport person, which can get you stuff back. I guess they could also technically be able to get you some of the things you otherwise couldn't get there if you needed to go out and buy potions or something. So if you really wanted to run a Wildemount campaign right up there at Easel Cross, then you could do that. And I think that I liked it. I would have liked to have spent more time there as a player, but recognizing we were on a time limit and it was becoming contrived if we stayed there any longer than we did. And the expedition, again, felt the same thing.
You know what's frustrating about that expedition was, and we're judging this purely on the content that we had as part of the free offering. And I know, as we mentioned earlier, that this is ostensibly a marketing piece. And there is obviously a huge amount more content in the actual book. So if you do want to run this, I would go out and buy the book, and because it can fill in a lot more gaps. And the whole events on Islecross, there's some really unique things there that I wish they had put one or two in this adventure to give you a taster. So for example, when the Aeorians were cast down, the fusion of magic created these weird little time pockets. So he actually talks about these little frozen vignette scenes of an Aeorian society, like maybe there's a marketplace and the sun is shining, there's kids running around, but it's in this kind of bubble of time, sitting in the middle of the Arctic tundra with the wind howling around it. Well, that for me creates a much more fantastic location and a really interesting event to happen on a 200-mile journey that also feeds in a bit of backstory and feeds in a bit of colour of the world. And I definitely think that was a missed trick. If they put that in as part of this kind of mini journey, I think that would have been a lot cooler.
I wonder if, just because we've got like a tiny snapshot of the whole thing, I quite enjoyed Pale Bank and I quite enjoyed the settlement we ended up at. They could have been the same settlement in some ways. They could have been just all one base camp.
Oh, absolutely.
And you could have had a bunch of explorers in Pale Bank and they could have brought in the glass blades and so on. It just seemed a shame that they were a ship journey away from each other when they were both places from which we launched. We met some NPCs. It was almost like we had to do it again.
That's a really good point, mate. Yeah.
That first section was actually quite a nice little one shot. This is the second one shot. It's got the same setup.
Yeah. So, really good point.
Yeah. All right. Well, we eventually do get on with it, and we take our march across the frozen wastes. We don't worry about what we see on the way, because I think we've also got that kind of slightly artificial sense that we're doing this on stream and we need to get to the action. So that's fine. And eventually we end up at the front of the boss dungeon, for want of a better word. And we kind of break in, following in the footsteps of the adventurers a couple of weeks before. And the place kind of has a bit of a unique feel to it, doesn't it? So for Gaz and Matt's perspective, and mine too, I guess, when we got through the door, or we were standing outside the door, what was it like to find out what was going on in there?
I think it's an interesting setup. It's certainly something that we can all take advice from when you're creating a dungeon, is what's the dungeon about? So it definitely had a reason why it was there, and some backstory, and that came out through the rooms and things that was happening in the dungeon itself. So yeah, that's all good. Enjoy that kind of thing. I think perhaps for me there was quite a few rooms where there wasn't anything going on, and some messages that perhaps you needed a certain language to read, which we sort of we gamed around anyway, because Matt kind of looked at what skills and languages we had and made it appropriate. So that's a trick that anyone can use as well. So I liked that it had a purpose, and I think you could double down on that. So it's an old magic laboratory, I think is the easiest way of describing it as a conceit. And I think we talked about this afterwards offline, but you could have more magic things in there. So a lot of stuff in the dungeons are animated, and I'd have liked to see a Tensor's floating disc with some flasks on coming past occasionally, or other things like that. I think it gives you a good basis for what the scenario is all about and what the laboratory is all about. But I think as a GM or a DM, you could think more about that and add even more details to make it come to life even more.
Totally agree. Make a magical laboratory magical in every way. Make it fascinating, make it exciting. You talked about the language. Don't hide your plot from the players. You know, and if that means making sure that, as GM Matt did very well, making sure that the information in books and on walls and all those other locations can be read by us, then great. Do that, because nothing's more frustrating than having something in Conic that no one speaks and you go, well, wonder what it is. It's not supposed to be a test of us choosing the right languages. It's about us feeling engaged with the story that happened here, I think, and making that place come alive. So
yeah, and I think you can meld the two there, can't you? So as you go in the first room, there's like something written there, and there's a bit of a test about what it might be. Given that it's a magical laboratory, it'd be interesting if you came in and it automatically translated into the language of the viewer.
Slowly transformed into,
because it's a magic laboratory, right? So it'll just auto-translate for you when you walk in and see it. I think, things like that can definitely help spin it.
We actually talked about putting an emphasis on a ticking clock as well. That would be a dawning realization. I think, as your idea, Baz, was have some of the undead denizens in there literally frozen because it's so cold. But as you walk in through the entrance, this magical laboratory knows that you've come on. The lights come on, and the warmth starts to kind of seep through the building, and the players will feel, oh, that's kind of cool, like that's kind of magical. But then there'll be that slowly realization is like, oh wait, does that mean all those zombies are going to start defrosting and we haven't dealt with them, kind of thing?
What have we done?
A really neat idea. Do you know the biggest problem I had with it? There was two, one specific and one general. The general one was it felt very much like corridor room fight, and when that happens, what you generally end up with is a doorway fight. And for me, doorway fights in D&D turn out to be in dice rolling competitions until something falls over, and they are possibly the least exciting ways of doing it. So I would perhaps look at where the monsters are actually placed and try and work out how can you get the player into a room, let the players separate out. So do you remember the blacksmith's room with the armor in it? I would maybe not activate them as soon as you get in. Let the players go and have a look at the corpse on the floor and maybe have a look at the anvil or the foundry, the forge, and poke about in there. And as they're split up, then you hear the clanking of the armor kind of as it comes to life. I think that would make that fight a lot more interesting. But the bit that I will kind of toss up in the air and let one of you catch and smash to the baseline is, please, for the love of God, don't put a library in a dungeon if none of the books are remotely interesting. It just, as a DM, you're like, there's a library. Oh, brilliant, players go. There must be something awesome in here, like a clue. No, there's nothing in here. They're all water damaged. And the whole idea is you get attacked by an octopus. That's it. It's just not good enough.
I was going to give the adventure props for some of the level of interactivity in the dungeon. I think it's a common failing to not have enough interactivity. But there was literally a lever or a button to press at one point, and there were some things to open and so on. Limited interactivity. But there were some times where it really wanted some interactivity and it just wasn't there. So we opened the door to an animated kitchen. We couldn't do anything about it except shut the door and ignore that encounter. The library thing, you're absolutely right. If you're going to put books in front of PCs, they're going to want to know what's in them. It's only reasonable, isn't it? And there was just a few things like the flesh golem coming out as well. It was just, the limited interactivity meant that there were very few choices for the party to make, and certainly not hard choices. The whole thing, if you bent the dungeon out and sort of undid it like a coat hanger made of wire, it was a single corridor with a bunch of rooms off of it. So it looked like a hotel. There weren't any loops, and there was no real dilemmas for us to choose. What do we do now? Where do we go? We camped out overnight in a room, and that's fine. But you couldn't get lost in there very easily, could you?
Wait, are you saying having 8 choices that you need to unpick the locks for was no choice?
I think we should also not lose sight of the fact that there was some pretty nasty traps and surprise attacks in there for what we were then second level. I think we got in there and we had the snake incident, the popping out, and I mean that was serious. We managed to avoid through lucky dice rolls, I guess, the nasty teleport you split the party to the other side of the dungeon trap, which if you're going into that as a DM with new players, that's not going to ingratiate your new players to the world of Dungeons and Dragons if you're teleporting someone into a room where they're going to get cut apart by a trap. And then as a new player, you need to, as a new DM, you need to manage both sides of that dungeon. So that's something that I think.
What do you reckon the percentage chances of a player dying if they get teleported into that room, the other side of the dungeon?
100%.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
It's not far off, is it?
I mean, for me, it's less the lethality. I think it's I'm not sure it's fun to split the party that way with no warning. I don't think it helps a new adventuring group. If the DM's now got to manage two people in different, like if he survives or she survives, you've then got someone you've got to manage on this side and then everybody else this side, and they don't know how to get to each other or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think perhaps in a book or a film that might play quite well, but I think in a role-playing game, especially if it's new players, it's just too much of a diversion. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll probably avoid that altogether.
Teleport traps suck, man.
Yeah, don't do them. These are nice. I think from the interactivity point of view that Baz was mentioning and talking about bringing things to life, a way of adding more clues with that kitchen, for example, is if the kitchen was still making food that doesn't exist, but the cutlery and stuff's still going through the motions, and then some animated armor or whatever picks up a plate with imaginary food on it to take to where the big dungeon baddie is, for want of a better phrase, the character still working here. Nice. If it still takes in meals 3 times a day and brings back empty plates, that gives you something to follow and interact with. And obviously that animated armor can walk through any other traps or monsters because no one's going to affect it. But if the party are following along like the Pied Piper, that gives them chances for encounters along the way as well.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
Yeah, I love the idea of it. As long as we don't get into a situation where people are talking to candles and talking clocks and dancing and might get a little too Disney at that point. But to be fair, that would probably still be a lot of fun. That's where you have to read the table and understand what do they want from a magical dungeon, because it's, as I say before, keep adding that magic, stacking it up until it becomes utterly fantastical.
So we crawl our way, and I don't mean that as a diss. It's a dungeon crawl. We crawl our way to the end of the dungeon. It turns out that we went left when we should have gone right, arguably, at reception. We end up going back around the dungeon to the correct end, and we reach a conclusion. If you want to check out the video, you'll see the denouement, the final combat, and the resolution of the whole thing. As a finale, how did that land with you guys? And Matt, how did you enjoy running it?
For me, it felt a little bit anticlimactic. I think that the sort of like the guardians of the final treasure being some crabs wasn't particularly exciting.
Giving it all that.
Yes, they were.
Hey,
that's why they bothered.
What are you around here?
I think there was something more interesting that could be done. I'm sure individual DMs can come up with themselves as well, but there's treasure in the water and there's some monsters about, things like that. There's definitely the bones of a good finale there. I think it just needed a bit more spice to make it work. I think one of the things we were leery of because of the Crocker Cave thing with the getting an exhausted condition if you go in the water too much. We were wary of going in the water, and that took away what could have been an interesting bit of environment to play with if someone had got to dive under the water to get to it, or there's some kind of stepping stone thing to jump across or something like that. I think it could have done with like a pseudo puzzle in there or something, or a choice to make it a bit more interesting. And then the crabs could just be the harassment rather than being an overwhelming beast or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean that the final for us, the final encounter as being crabs is just far too mundane for a fantastical library. You know, we know that there's a necromancer. Make them undead crabs, make them magical crabs with wings, make them anything other than regular crabs, because you've got you've got a laboratory and you've got a necromancer. I mean, you know, you bring those two things together and anything could happen.
And a kitchen.
And a kitchen and a library. Okay, there's not much in there, but you've got all the elements, all the recipes, or the recipe you need to have something exciting at the end there.
I mean, one thing that could have been quite interesting, actually, depends on how another party went through, but because we killed that like an octopus tentacle thing, whatever it was, if the necromancer had melted that in some way and reanimated it, it would have been, because those rooms linked at the back by the lake, right?
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to go back in there and he's come back again, but this time it's undead because he still wants his servitor kind of thing. That would make an interesting second encounter, like he's back for seconds kind of thing.
Yeah, I just reminded myself of it. Like, I wish I'd foreshadowed that end fight by having the octopus or whatever it is slip into the water as you walk into the library, and you're like, wait, what? And you're like, there's this massive shadow just swimming away out into the lake, like, oh God. And then you go all the way around, and now suddenly you realise you've got to go into the water to get the final bits and pieces, and you know there's this big lurking shadowy type thing in there.
And you're drawing straws.
You can see the ink bleeding through the water and know it's come back. And
And I think, so the thing I would kind of urge people to think about is the laboratory is kind of tipping into this kind of inland sea, frozen sea. I would use that to put a clock on the game. So not necessarily a hard clock, but a dramatic clock. So at certain points, have it tilt further in. And at the point where you go into that room and you know that the cure is at the other side of the room, that's the point where it tips in. And if they don't act swiftly, it's going to disappear under the water. And now you've got a tension mechanic. Now the players are thinking, oh God, we've got to move real quick. And wait, what is that massive black shadowy thing with tentacles coming along? These crabs are annoying, but they're slowing us down. And these tentacles are coming out and grabbing us, and the whole thing's slipping into the water. It's way more exciting at that point in time.
Yeah. As written, it needed the foreshadow. The dungeon could have been that, as you said, that tension mechanic towards the end, especially given it was something that had fallen from the skies or whatever it had done. You know, there was a lot of opportunity there. Read through the adventure, read through the dungeon, look at it as a magical place, foreshadowing, bring it alive a bit more with things moving around rather than locked in their rooms waiting for the PCs to open the doors. And you've got something which I think will be very memorable.
And I would definitely not make the crabs or the octopus or crabs. I would read the Wildemount book, read about the big experimentations that the Aeorians did and the weird constructed animals that they created, which was foreshadowed by the flesh golem earlier on in the adventure. Make it some magical, mystical, crazy, messed up scientific experiment creature, not an octopus in the middle of the Arctic, because that just seems weird as well.
The best crabs. There we go.
I think one of the things that I noticed as we were going through it, I could notice DM Matt chewing his knuckles, going, "Oh, let me meld this and shape it and react to what you're saying," because I recall every time the three of us were outside a door speculating on what might be on the other side, our ideas were better than what happened when we opened the door. Almost. So if you were doing this for real, you know, that old thing about listening to what your players are saying, because we were having all kinds of speculation about the history of the place and the story, what might be going on. That's good when you've got players talking to each other. And no, you know, the Matt Mercer police aren't going to come round and tell you off if you make adjustments to what's going on. And I could tell, Matt, that you were kind of desperate to do something slightly different and twist it a little bit, or turn this volume knob up and push that lever down. Am I right?
Oh no, definitely, and you know, having met and chatted with Mr. Mercer quite a few times, I know that he would absolutely hate if people felt constrained just because that's what he'd written down, and he would absolutely want you to make it your own adventure and really react to what the players are doing and make the players the heroes of that particular story. That would be the thing that would make him happiest.
Okay. So last section, rewards. What did we get out of this as PCs, first of all? I don't recall, maybe I've just forgotten this. Did we get any magic items or treasure?
No, we kind of, because of time constraints, because we were recording it, we kind of binged to the end, didn't we?
Cool.
So we did the final scene and then the credits rolled and we decided that would be like the finale to that particular mini-series, and then we'd ask Netflix if we could commission a second series at that point.
We had a Star Wars medal ceremony where we're back at Pale Bank and people are getting cured.
Yeah.
Furs.
See, I think that's another reason for having Pale Bank closer to Eisencross, or starting at Eisencross, because I like the idea that there's someone there that transports magical treasures around the world or back again and that kind of thing. But as a denouement for the story, you throw the cure in the box and it gets teleported and you go, oh, thank God we did that, we saved everyone. but you are not there while everyone else is drinking the potion and getting healed.
Right.
Turn up 2 weeks later. That feels like you're taking something a little bit away from the players and their achievement.
A little bit. Actually,
that wants to tighten up a bit better.
Yeah. When you say that, because that actually makes me worried about, there's a weird little sort of narrative inconsistency, which is the Tiamat priestess was desperate to leave town to go and find a cure, but the really rich merchants and their family are more than happy to hang around in this pokey backwater place, hoping that 3 random people are going to go to a really dangerous place in the Arctic, hoping to randomly find a cure. Don't worry, we'll be back. They would be on their rich horses and galloping for the south as fast as they could, wouldn't they?
Even the horses are rich. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we glossed over rewards in the adventure, which is fine. I think we were designed to be like level 3 or something at the end of this. So it's a tutorial game, isn't it? It's an apprenticeship adventure.
Yeah.
Did it succeed at what it was trying to do? Is it a good introduction to Wildemount and to adventuring in a brand new campaign world that feels, I guess one of the goals must be that it doesn't feel like Eberron or Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms. Did it do that? Do you want to go back?
So I think one of the things we need to be mindful of is that we played this without having read The Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. You know, it was taken out of that context. And if this was a packaged scenario as is, I think I would have been dissatisfied with it because it laid down a few kind of ideas, teased me. But if you had read, you know, Explorer's Guide to Wildemount and you were making this the introductory adventure to your campaign and you were going to extend it further, I am much more sympathetic to the idea that you could have brought those elements in. And in fact, it's in the book itself. It's one of the 3 or 4 adventures in the book. I think it needs to be in that book to really prove its value. Taking it away from the book, you lose a lot. I think that's how I would describe it.
I agree with most of that. I think there was a couple of bits where we got pointers to other places which you need to know about. So it was kind of, there was some secret gang or something down to the south and stuff like that, but we weren't going to go there. Some other stuff. So yeah, I think you've got to think about it when you play this in terms of presumably people have either watched some of the Critical Role shows or they've read the book or the GM's given a good primer or something. So yeah, I think I agree with Matt that standalone it feels a little bit, while I like the Islecross idea and the sort of like the spaceship effectively that's crashed into the ground from ages ago with this magical laboratory, and there's things like that are interesting. You kind of want to explore more. We probably just needed a bit more of a background flavour for how things were generally to know where we slotted into that. I think.
Okay. I mean, I came to it cold, very little experience of Critical Role even, and I think that I'm sure an awful lot of people who pick up this adventure will be critters. And maybe for them, they've already got a huge amount of buy-in into this. I don't have that experience, but like I say, I came to it cold and left freezing. I kind of enjoyed it, actually. I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it, but it very much felt like D&D to me. And homebrew D&D, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. There were caves, there were journeys. I fought some zombies in a dungeon. I got everything that I bought with my ticket of entry. I really enjoyed our characters and the way that there was a dynamic going on. And I thought Matt ran a great game. Could it be improved? We've listed a bunch of stuff that we would do differently if we had to go over it again. And Matt was inspired enough to run it again with those tweaks. So that's I think a positive. And I would absolutely go back and have another look through that book, and I might even tune into some Crit Roll to see if anyone else has played it and see what they did. So I take that as a positive.
Yeah, I think it's worth bearing in mind that we specifically set out to play this scenario as close to the book as possible.
Yeah.
Whereas, as Matt's already mentioned, that even the author would prefer that you tuned it to your player. So, in a way, we were sort of handicapping ourselves a little bit by trying to keep true to the scenario, because I think if we played this normally, in inverted commas, or anybody else does, then go hog wild with it and add bits or take away, do whatever we want to make it a much more smoother experience. So perhaps some of the not quite as positive comments we make are only because we're trying to hold strictly to a set of guidelines that we wouldn't do normally, I guess.
Yeah.
I think for pre-adventure, I think there's a lot there. I mean, we accelerate accelerated through, and it still took us, what, 4 sessions? I think if you were playing that at more normal pace, you could easily have got a good 5 or 6 weeks worth of gaming out of that, and not felt rushed and not felt too slow, and really embedded in. And I think for me, the best idea that I think we've come up with, and it's your idea, Baz, is make Pale Bank and the landing spot one and the same, because then all the investment that you're putting into the meeting the NPCs through the early part of the adventure will pay off if you then want to use that as a launch pad for adventure into Weiselcross. I think that's the best piece of advice and the biggest change that I would make to it. But other than that, for a free adventure, 6 weeks worth of good solid gaming out of it with some cool stuff, I'm down with that. Hats off to it.
Yeah, I think I'd just summarise by saying it ticked the boxes. I don't think it was the most innovative setup. I think we've seen it before, but there was a lot of fun to be had here. There's a lot of hooks that you could extend it with. Definitely as a DM, and you could say this about every adventure, I guess, read through it, think about, especially that dungeon at the end, how people are going to progress through it and where you're going to find the beats, right? Where you're going to keep the momentum, and think about what they're there to do and how they're going to get through the dungeon to get there, and what they're going to encounter at the end. Because, you know, you had a necromancer, you had a magical dungeon, you had some crabs in the box at the end.
Box full of crabs. It's a seafood delivery. All right, so thank you guys. In the spirit of thanks, just want to run down some quick thank yous to the people involved in this. So thank you very much, Wizard of the Coast, for making this adventure free and really accessible, whether that be through D&D Beyond and the guys at Roll20 as well. Just really good to see something out there that people can have a go at. I want to thank Matt very much for running it. I really enjoyed playing it. Great to do that, and a bit of a new experience for us as well. I hope that you guys enjoyed watching that on your screens. And massive thanks to Matt and to Gaz and my fellow players for forming the Fellowship of Frost, or whatever it was we decided to call ourselves in the end. And what I'll do is I'll just pass on for some final thoughts, and then maybe Gaz some smart party business at the end, and we'll call that done.
Hopefully.
Well, I'll dive in. My final thoughts were, I had a blast. I love playing with you guys. Hopefully that came through on the actual play videos, and I look forward to sharing some of the notes from the subsequent run-throughs I've had with the Smart Party listeners and now viewers.
Quite. Anything from you, other Matt?
As other Matt, I mean, really just to echo what Matt said, I had a blast. It was great to play with you guys. It really was. I think the dynamic worked really well. We had a giggle, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. Sometimes it's cathartic to dissect these things, and hopefully people will find a lot of value in learning from our experiences.
Cool. Yep. I equally had a great time. Thanks to my GM and players. I'll continue to call him a GM, not a DM. I don't care. I know it's Dungeons and Dragons. Some things are hard to break, some topics. Anyway, if you like talking about games as much as playing them, like we do, obviously, given this channel, you can head over to whatwouldthesmartpartydo.com to listen to our podcast with over 100 episodes. Obviously, we're going to try doing more of this kind of shenanigans over coming weeks. So if you have any thoughts on the Wildemount adventure, the world, other scenarios you could run, what we could do better, how to improve this scenario yourselves, please drop it in the comments below or send us a message. And of course, all this is powered by our glorious patrons. So head on to patreon.com/The Smart Party or any of the links that you can see on any of the videos.
Bye.